Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Minister, I think, first of all, I think it's worth highlighting the initial point that even though the former minister who spoke argues quite strongly that just there cannot arise a conflict of interest, I think we would be unwise as a committee to dismiss the fact that the ministers are appointed by the president, they serve the president, they must defend the president, and in part, the interministerial report must be seen in some of that light. Cannot be dismissed simply because it must have been discussed at Luthuli House, equally so. So I think we must understand, at least in my view, there is a clear conflict of interest that arises here. Because I want to request that the committee seriously give consideration to allowing the public protector to come through, so she can speak to some of the aspects that have been spoken about here. Because at least from her perspective, I would believe that she would act for the defense of the Constitution, not the leader of a political party. I think there's a particular point I want to look at, which is written in the SIU report, where there's commentary from the SIU report that highlights the responsibilities, the segregation between the executive and the administration. And what is tricky here is that I accept the points that the Minister of Public Works highlights, that there are officials who are being charged for this matter. The fundamental question is, was it grand collusion and theft by the officials being charged, or was there a form of political pressure that was applied? That's a fundamental question. And the SIU goes further to say, look, the executive must always needs to guard against their names being used by overzealous officials. In such circumstances, perceptions are just as important as reality. And so I want to highlight the key perception as I view it from the project. We know in the SIU report that the president facilitated, it's reported here, that he facilitated a meeting between his architect, because the architect didn't come from anywhere, and Public Works. The president admits he facilitated that meeting. It's that perception that says that as the architect then speaks, the architect speaks on behalf of the principal, who is the president. The second issue here is that the public protector highlights the fact that when that particular transaction took place, it gave what the public protector describes as a license to loot. So my interest and fascination here is that on another day, the court process that Nkandla Makhanya is undergoing is important, and I would hope that it would get us to a point where we get to understand what gave him the license. What gave him the license to loot? What allows an independent contractor, someone who doesn't even necessarily work for the government, to instruct a whole government department to deviate funds that you highlighted, the types that exceed any regulation? I mean, it is quite impressive. You must at least give him credit for that. This is a phenomenal character. He's able to, as it would be any a member of the society, getting up, coming to Public Works, saying, we must deviate funds from this project and from that project, finance that particular project, and people simply do it. At least, and fine, you can charge the same person. But I'm just fascinated by the power this person has, because it's unbelievable in my view. And if that is so, then the process that we are following must arrive at that conclusion, but I beg to differ. I think we cannot dismiss the fact that there was political influence, as the SIU highlights that it is just as important as reality. And I want to argue further that it is improbable. If you read the rest of the SIU report, the president did highlight the fact that progress was slow. So yes, once that takes place, of course, we must speed up things. And the point is, we cannot sit here today and say, if someone that I have hired does something completely wrong, that I can't be held culpable. So the extent to the charging, I was to ask, honestly, why are we absolving the president of all and all responsibility? For after all, he facilitated the meeting with the architect. After all, there was license to loot being put forward. And further, and more seriously, the president here is a key benefactor. So, when I look at the public protector's report, she highlights the fact that the president did not answer many of the questions that were sent to him. In the SIU report, it is the case. I'm fascinated to learn whether or not we are simply going to accept this whole line that the president is unclear about this project, and that in fact there's no culpability. We've gone to great lengths to charge the officials, but surely they could not have been acting on their own instruction, because if that is the case, Mr. Makhanya is an unbelievably talented man. I think it's worth my while saying that we can't barge the media from at least attending these reports, because this has become quite a national project. And I think those who are responsible in this instance must be given the freedom to speak so that they can clear their names if there are names to be cleared, so that we cannot absolve the politicians of any form of responsibility when it comes to this issue. Because I was fascinated to learn that the politicians, the party political principles, particularly the ministers at that point, as you say, Minister, you've stopped the project, that Minister Deutsch and Minister Bokhopane are certainly not part of this extended investigation. Can I request, Minister, that it's quite coincidental that, as we discussed this morning, that the houses were built next door to the president's house? Have you got the lease agreement, and could it be furnished to this particular committee? For its delay, the lease came later subsequent to the building. At least I might be mistaken in that score, but maybe you can clarify why there was such a delay in the matter. And then finally, I think, Minister, your interest and my interest here are important, because both of us want to save the state from going through this headache. But you've tasked, in some ways, the process of retabling. I mean, I've requested and I've written to the presidency to ask for the presidential handbook to try and understand what determinations we put forward. I appreciate the ministerial handbook. How do we ensure that this project never gets repeated, particularly when it deals to the security of members of the executive? But here's the problem that I want to highlight, is that what can that particular process not be tabled so that Parliament can at least interrogate it? Because ultimately, the executive is held accountable by Parliament. And I'm wanting to propose that, at least if you've got that particular document, that it can't just be exclusively cabinet-driven, if that's possible. Thank you.